Welcome to Sacred Conversations, a place where Dr. Nicole Dolan and I, Robin Bethel, along with a myriad of guests, explore some of the sacred threads and wholeness of life, held within the light and within the dark, held within the immensity. Thank you for being with us. In this first episode, recorded on Valentine's Day, Nicole and I opened up into this new shared venture of love by introducing ourselves in vignette, in flash of story, in one piece of the whole that was and is deeply meaningful to us. And then we finished by inviting an oracle card from a deck I had at my desk, which I forget to properly narrate. So I'm sorry if that's confusing. You are listening to our imperfect stepping into new stream, and we hope, imperfections and all, it meets you with goodness. However it meets you, we'll trust it's just right. So this is our first episode of Sacred Conversations, and we've been in conversation so much over 4+ years. So it feels like just an extension of what we've done so many times in ways, but with a new perspective and a new sense of call and gift. You and I share such attunement to the sacred and these arcs of life that bring in like so many sacred notes, so many notes of wholeness. Like we're often sitting with the wholeness of things. You know, I would just say we both have gone through a lot of like death and rebirth journeys since we've known each other, which hasn't been that long in the context of how long we've been death and rebirthing.
Yeah.
like I feel that begun way before, but like even just since then we've collided, like we've seen other ones, you know, what we've gone through. And so what I want to do today mostly is just as our first foray into this space, before we invite in any guests, just introducing who we are in small part, maybe just through something that you'd like to share. Well, first, maybe do you want to begin and share how we met?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep. Start there. I'm feeling into that though, because I actually, maybe I want to start, I'll answer that question. But I might want to start a little bit different because I'm
Sure.
feeling very intuitively aligned today, which feels awesome. Speaking to what you were saying, like we have an attunement, which just brings sacred space in itself, which I love so much. And as I was getting ready today this morning, I was saying to myself, I was like kind of like little conversation in my head, which I often trust as intuition, you know, and I was like, yeah, okay. So I've been on podcasts before and people ask, you know, like, so who are you and what do you do? You know, and I, you know, going through the little list in my head, because I do many, many things, I was like, yeah, but then I might say something and like to hold the intention of what it is that we're creating here, I might actually introduce myself in a different way. Right. So I am, you know, in the world in which we have labels, I am a psychologist with a depth psychology background, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm a mother of 3, and I'm writing my first book, which is where Robin comes in. But I'm also a seeker and a mother and a wounded healer. And I deeply identify with the archetype of wounded healer, whether I like that or not all the time. I'm definitely somebody who came into this world with not only my stories, but the stories of the past. And I have come into this world to bring those stories up and to do the deep work of shifting patterns and healing and bringing change, not only in my life, but so that I can bring that to others as well and help them along their paths. So So yes, how we met was in the process of me creating my first book. You came into my life as editor and quickly became not only like close friend, but also shared voice, right? Like that
Mm,
was a big one for me. I always said I would take a piece of my work and I would send it to you. And then when it came back, I would say it felt like it was like touched by love, It was like
mm,
there were it would come back. There were two things I would notice. One was it would come back to me and it would be I wouldn't know, like, what you changed, like, it was always so subtle, but it was always in a way that it felt like we were sharing a voice, like, it never
mm,
felt like it was shifting away from my energy either, um, and the other thing was and I shared this with you once, I felt like it was just an absolute gift of yours, and so I shared this with you. I was like, I feel like there's certain stories that I've shared with you that before you've made those subtle changes or processed them with me in a certain way, I didn't recognize maybe the arc of their beauty, Like I didn't see I mean, I see things in wholeness, I see things with meaning, I see things sacred in my own light, but there was something about I really resonate today with that touch of love, which is so beautiful that it's Valentine's Day in that way,
yeah.
because it was just it really felt like that. It was like you could touch each of those stories, even ones that maybe felt like smaller threads that I didn't know held so much beauty or meaning. And when they would come back to me as we kind of exchanged them back and forth, it did feel like that. There was this touch of love. There was this shift, and it kind of shifted even the way that I saw my own stories in ways. So I really appreciate that.
Mm,
And that's what really comes through when I think about our initial meeting and our work together.
yeah. And I feel like I would say we have like some shared space that is really intensely shared. Like certain things. And then we also have ways where we're opposite,
Mhm.
And I feel like both of those things came in so early. I feel like I asked you something that I have asked a number of people, and I don't think any other client has answered it like you did, and you answered it like how I would. I asked you to take me through the psycho-spiritual arc of your life, and
Mhm.
I don't know if you said this, but essentially you were like, "Well, how long do we have?" Whether you said that or not, and we proceeded to go into, by all not comprehensive, but, like an hour long
Mhm.
opening into some deep things that were a piece of one arc or like the start of the overarching arc. And that's how I can talk about my life too, but I feel we both are so attuned to this question. So it makes sense that now we've moved into this space.
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
so that's how we met, and that's why we're here now on Valentine's Day in conversation. And I think rather than offering a large arc as introduction to ourselves, I kind of just wanted us to each share one story, whatever you feel like sharing today. I don't really want to guide it at all, but just some meaningful
Yeah.
vignette or something that you'd like to bring up.
Mm. Yeah. Just feeling into that, trusting as I teach many others to learn, to honor their own intuition and to be able to really feel into those deeper answers. And so I'm somebody who pauses a lot. So just kind of closing my eyes and gathering information, seeing what comes, right? Because when you ask a question like that, obviously there's so many stories that can come through. I also think of one of the things that I love about us doing this is, there will be guests that we bring on that have these huge stories and I
Mhm.
everybody does, but not everybody has done the work to unravel their stories.
Mhm.
It's they don't necessarily feel big or meaningful
Mhm.
to them sometimes in ways. And so I felt like one of the most beautiful things about when you approached me with this idea is it's like I love the idea of people being able to be with another's story and not only be, inspired by it, moved by it, but for it to really start to open something in them, which helps them
Mhm.
start to see the depth and the meaning of their own stories.
Mhm.
So, with that in mind, I think what comes through when I think about sharing a story is like my process um, with writing this book, not the entire process, but what's coming up right now is, um, gosh, when I started writing this book, I mean, I've been writing this book for 10 years, even when I was working on my doctorate, I would like do my academic writing and then I would take the writing for this book and I'd put it over here and sometimes I'd work on that because it's more fun, right? I couldn't
Mhm.
wait to like write a book with no rules, which is so, my I've got my double Capricorn in there, but I've also got my opposite Aquarius, which just like
Mhm.
let's break all the rules, right?
Yeah.
Could not wait for that opportunity. And when I had time to really start pouring into it, it was like, okay, I've been through so many things, and at an age, that most people haven't always had those experiences by. Um,
Mhm.
I've called them, life lesson fastballs, right? I've identified as a wound healer. Not that
Mhm.
I attract any more of that to me, but just to say, it's like I've had these experiences so that I can move through them and then help others, and I trust that. So I had been through a lot by the time I was writing this book in the beginning of my 30s, even, and well, even before that. But I was in this place with it where it was like, I want to be able to tell these stories where most people are still, that have had these experiences, they're bringing them forward into their lives and they're kind of stuck, right? Like their relationships that didn't work out, traumas that have happened, things that have been triggering, painful, awesome things too. But most people hold them in this light of like, that person did this to me or this really terrible thing happened and so it changed the way that I am in the world. I'm no longer going out there. I'm no longer going to use my voice or put myself out there. Um and for me it's like I really wanted to take these stories and help people see the deeper meaning in them,
Mhm.
right? We learn from going through difficult experiences, the way that they shape us, the way that they create our path forward. So I started in this place of like, oh my gosh, I have all these stories and I get to tell you the deeper meaning in them and how I've been able to thread, really difficult things in life into these really beautiful spaces. And genuinely, not just, we're not spiritual bypassing, we're not like rainbows and sunshining, we're
Mhm.
genuinely doing the work that brings you into a place of wholeness with them. What a beautiful book. So I
Mhm.
start writing this book. I work on this book. When I get to the place where I don't know, I thought I had like a year left when I met you. Now we're going on like 4.5 years.
Right.
I think I sent you the book in 2020, and I sent it your way. And like the moment I did, I like knew. I was like, oh, that's not it. It's not done. And I got to go through this first year with you of just like this. I mean, you just held the most beautiful space, Robin. It was just like, it was like, it was like you were so genuinely interested in the arc and the stories and just like deepened into them with me and helped shape them and move them. And it just was incredible. And I just loved it, and every time we met, I was just, oh, this is so meaningful. And then once I had handed it over to you, I felt like I started having intuitive guidance, spiritual guidance coming through that was like, yeah, and how are you going to make this applicable to everyone? Not
Mhm.
everyone can just like put a backpack on and go trek through Bangkok, like not everyone
Mhm.
can go search, the other part of the world for the answers or whatever it is, right? And it was just like, how are you going to make that applicable to everyone? And I happened to then at that point in my life be in like the deepest story I had been in, right? I was mothering. I was mothering a neurodivergent child. I was going through so much chaos and yet still buoying it all up with the beauty and the meaning of all of the things that we were working on. But it was a bit of a descent, and a bit is a gentle word. I mean, it was a total descent, when I
There's a
realized
portal to hell. No, I'm just kidding.
hell. There was a hell. It's like, okay, like this is, we went through the honeymoon phase, which is very much, going into those life and death cycles, right? We went through the honeymoon phase and it was lovely. And now we're going back in. We're going, through the portal through hell, right? We're going back to
Mhm,
the underworld. We're going to hang out with the demons
mhm.
dark. And
New
um
ones.
say,
New ones.
yeah, new ones, right? Yes. New Yeah. That's kind of the fascinating thing about all the things that you go through in life. It's like you're like, okay, well, nothing's going to be like that. Well, you're right. It's just completely different, but it can
Mhm,
still hit you at the same level or deeper, right? So,
mhm,
not to be so dark, but so yeah, so then I start, deepening into these spaces and, being in my own story in real time, trying to pull through my own messages of like, this is all meaningful and it's going to be so wonderful in the end. And all this beauty is waiting on the end of at the end of the tunnel, and,
mhm,
but I literally was like brought into, okay, well, you're going to live through this now,
mm,
and not now again, right? But a different arc. You're going to live through this. And it was difficult. It's still difficult. I don't want to say that it's not. I think that's the point about healing and sacred stories is they're cyclical in nature.
mhm,
Um, but it was raw and it was difficult and I was very apprehensive about writing about the real story and the real time that I was in.
mm,
It was
mhm,
like I don't know, how's my child gonna feel, right? If one day she
mhm,
reads this book and I'm telling you about some of the episodes that are happening in our house, or how's my husband gonna feel when I'm explaining to you how challenging it is to be in a relationship while you're mothering and fathering, a child with special needs. It just felt like it was like really unearthing things that I just didn't really want to talk about. And so I surrendered to it and I just said, okay, it's fine. It's not like we're publishing it right away. Just write the book. Right. So I
mhm,
started going back into the book and really layering in a little bit more. I mean, you saw it. It was like part
mhm,
two at the end,
mhm. What I'm in right now.
what I'm in right now, snapshot of today.
Yeah, we're like, it's not tidy, we're still in the thick of it,
Right.
but
And then
I'm giving you a little taste.
and then let's just end it there.
Yeah.
Right. It. And then what kind of progressed from there, more recently in the last year is, I started working with a literary agent and he started, kind of feeling into some of this and it makes sense, right? He started saying to me like, this is your story though. Like this, your past is your
Mhm,
story too, but
mhm,
this right now is your story. And so through that work, and you can even hear and feel the energy and the hesitation that still is here. I'm still working through it
mm,
because it was like no, like this is the story, like this is the story, this part that you don't want to tell, this is your story.
mm,
So I've started to do that, and that's where we've gone is I've started to really share this raw experience, which what it is for me right now is as a mother of an autistic child and two others. You got an ADHD kiddo that's like bouncing off of the walls, driving the autistic one nuts, right? So you got this beautiful little highly sensitive baby running around. So
mm,
it can be really intense and also speaking to meaning and sacred story along my journey I've started really threading through like what is mine and what comes from before me, what comes from my own childhood that's getting triggered in me as a mother, what comes from my mother and her mother, like what is all present in this relationship. And I recently was writing a passage where in the end I said, I realized in that moment, I am my mother and my daughter.
Hmm.
So it's coming full circle, and it's becoming this two storyline story that's getting weaved together where we're honoring not only the past that I was so happy to kind of wrap in a bow and say,
Mhm.
lived happily ever after.
Mhm.
know, we opened that back up and we went back in just like we do in life. And we brought that other part of me that's even more raw and vulnerable and honest with the intention of being able to really speak to others and their sacred stories,
Mm.
right? Um, Not only because I don't think in our society we don't necessarily recognize the meaning and the depth of our stories as we're saying, but also because we hide from them. We don't show
Mm.
parts of ourselves to the world. We feel as though, especially as mothers, and women. I mean, I think we especially feel, probably men too. So I don't want to exclude them, but that we're meant to be perfect, that we're meant to show up in this one way, this one light, right? And so to share such raw, honest, immersive vulnerability, and then to work to not only show the parts where you do come out on the other end of the tunnel
Mhm.
where it's all beauty and light, and then you get to be in, the goodness and the honeymoon cycle for a while before you descend again,
Mhm.
and then to also share the cyclical journey of those cycles of life.
Mhm. I would say, if I can jump in, earlier you said when you first wrote that draft, your initial draft, and then you were thinking, oh, but how does this meet other people? Maybe not everyone can go seeking the answers around the world or whatnot. I have to say, I would not frame that your travels are what brought you through that cycle in the way that it did, where you absorbed and integrated a lot of meaning and depth and transformation. That was a feature of that journey in small part, but to me, that's not what it is. To me, it feels more like your willingness to open to all the difficult feelings and open and allow it all to meet you and be with it so closely is what brought you through that journey with meaning. And as part of that, yes, you took a trip to Europe, but it's like that to me and details there met you. But to me, that's just a detail. That's where you happen to be for a piece of a transformative journey. So I think it's more your willingness to open into the death and feel it all and just be open to everything that was meant to meet you then. But when you mention like, oh, how will a reader really feel this? To me, where I feel like, oh, but yes, that's like a journey that by the time you're writing the book, you'd really integrated it. And
Mhm.
so it's like it does feel okay, what feels accessible to someone who maybe is in a space of like, this is a mess, it's not integrated, for you to then be writing from the mess, like
Mhm.
something you haven't integrated yet
Mhm.
and how you can move through that. Like that can meet people with such, in maybe a more accessible way. The other journey was beautiful. And it's like that journey is where you kind of learned to move through life in the way that you do now. It was like almost the origin story of how you experience and open into life and integrate it. So it is important. It's like that's how that's when you first did it. So it's pivotal. But now,
Mhm.
of course, you've got to do it over and over.
Mhm. Mhm.
I see that being the accessible part. Not that it's like you traveled as a piece of that, but it's like you opened so deeply into what met you And I think that that's what often keeps people from really moving through things in a way where you're like integrating all this gold, because they're doing their best to hold it at bay,
Yeah.
the whole time. And this sense that, like, well, the more I can focus on the positive, the better. Not everyone, but there, I think, is a cultural tendency to not want to experience all the grief, to not want to open into all of that, to try and stay in the light as much as possible. And so it almost like it extends that journey longer, because you never descend, you never come to the heart of it. And so you never can cross through in the same way. It's like always on the edges. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I love that in your book, then you are like, I have to write about what isn't yet integrated, what I can't just have the answers to yet.
Yeah. No, I appreciate what you're sharing. And I certainly feel like to say that it's just about traveling or something, you're right, is completely minimizing. I think it was being in a place now, but even now,
Mhm.
where I was a mother who was like falling apart in ways.
Right.
And then as soon as I descended, fell apart in all the ways. I think I was trying to stay in the light, before,
Yeah.
and like, all right, here we go. So,
And
uh,
that's another, I'm gonna jump in, another thing that I've, from you, that I've taken, like, the first time you descended, you were descending into this space, having this transformation, and it was really around self, and then, like you said, you came into a place where now I'm having death and rebirth, transformation, difficulty, what do I do next? But yet situating within the wholeness, within the context of family and relationship. And that was like a whole new world,
right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. No, I resonate with all of that. And I think that was part of the resistance and also the hesitance. I mean, both of those pieces, when you say like just describing it as unintegrated is really helpful. And it,
Mm.
it almost feels crazy. Like who writes a book from an unintegrated place, right? Like like it just feels so uncomfortable to be in
Oh, yeah.
and to not have gotten to the other side
Mhm.
yet
Mhm.
fully. And so there is, and like I said, you can feel the anxiety when I talk about it a little bit, because it's like it is so raw and it is so unintegrated. Parts of it are integrated, right? But so there was a lot of resistance. And to your point, it was such a wild journey to have done such deep inner work, to have
Mhm.
gotten myself to a place as an individual, right? Where it was like, oh my gosh, I've got this figured out. Like I'm good,
Mhm.
you know? And and not just in the way like we're speaking about, like those who want to just stay in the light. It's like, yeah, and we might feel like that works for us, but it doesn't really. I mean, that's where, depth psychology comes into therapy, where it's like, well, what does the
Mhm.
soul want? Because you're still going to see those symptoms showing up in your life. You might not know why they're there or under the surface, but they're there because your story is calling.
Mhm.
But yeah, so to have gotten to this place where it's like that story wasn't really calling me anymore. Like there weren't charges. There was all this beauty and integration. There was, even my deepest traumas and wounds, like I could talk about them. I could sit with
Mhm.
clients and help them move and shapeshift their own stuff. Um, and then to find myself right in marriage and in family, and just to be like, oh my gosh, I'm a mess. I'm like, and so many times I had that feeling too. It was like I had to work so like it took so long to surrender the
Mhm.
I, because it was like, okay, well, and I love my family. So don't get me wrong, but it was a sense of like, okay, if I was just on my own, like I'd be fine. Like I don't
Right.
know. It just brought everything up. It just took
Mhm.
me into other layers that I didn't even know were still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Mm. I feel we should also add,
Mhm.
Nicole is a PhD depth psychologist. And so a lot of her journeys have risen from opening into things through that program of study along with life. the two of them colliding together. And then it's informed how you move through things. It like offered you kind of like a different sort of way of looking at it, right? So
Mhm.
then when these things happen to you in your life, you're you kind of were ready to approach it with this depth and descent, and you talk about Persephone a lot.
Mm,
I feel like
mhm.
and
Mhm.
so you bring this lens of myth often to these things. So I think that's really lovely. But yeah, I feel like we both are like queens of the underworld. But she's only there for half the year, right? So
That's right. 3 months out of the year, 3
yes.
pomegranate seeds, winter. So
It's a reasonable amount of time. Your really first deep journey was in self, right? And then you came into having to grapple with all these relationship things. And I was thinking before our call, I was like, oh, maybe I'll just share one of my death and rebirth stories. And then there are really a number of them, but I feel like it kind of echoes. It's like the first one was just more general. And then after that, I feel like they were always relationship things generally. But yeah, I think I will just kind of really keeping it kind of surface level for what the story could be. But I grew up in kind of like an easy space of grace where I felt like I would say a characteristic, like something through my whole life mostly has been like a deep sense of okayness. And I feel like okayness sounds like such a prosaic word. Like it sounds like nothing, but I mean it like everything. I mean it like when I just say a deep sense of okayness, it's like being okay in the world, of like being okay in self and all of this. Like very rooted to soul and heart. But I feel when I was younger, it was just kind of there, and it was there, but it wasn't really, I don't know. It was there, but it wasn't really like forged in fire or anchored in this way. It was just kind of like this autopilot sense of it. So it was still like it was lovely, but it wasn't as deep. And then I think, and I kind of had like a general sense of just like an easy love and light. I do yoga sometimes. Spirituality, I also didn't quite have a certainty that the soul, would go on past our death or anything. I love the idea, but I didn't feel it in my core, um, at least in my early 20s. And then I got married, and um, from something that I think most people would think, why is this even a thing? I So my then husband, um, before we met, I'd say kind of like 18 to 24, I definitely had a party girl vibe. And some of those years, I definitely drank more. And then once we started dating, then that really fell away a lot, which I was thinking is a really beautiful gift of that. But still, I would sometimes. And then after we got married, we went to a friend's going away party, and I got drunk, and then I don't remember everything. And I was told that I was so mean to my then husband. And I heard of something I said, and it just like daggered my heart.
Mm.
I felt it was in this thing, like it had no real external world effect. It wasn't, I mean, it wasn't even, I guess, that wildly outside of just if you're drinking and you're kind of a brat, to somebody.
Mhm.
But for whatever reason, like I was recently married, I entered into being married with such a sense of thankfulness and our love. Like we had such a loving energy towards each other. And something about this really like it provoked like an OCD level of processing around it, which I
Mm,
feel like ties into my family does have some of these OCD like compulsive strands, which for the most part are entirely um, not a part of my being at all. Like anxiety is not my natural like dark space that I go to, but it triggered this and I was with it so closely and it like it made my previous sense of grace, and just like deep okayness, it brought everything like it dissolved it all, it was like total dissolution and then reconstruction and it was pretty intense for a few months and then it kind of settled back in, but it was like I knew what could never be taken away from me. I knew like who I was at my deepest core. I knew like what grace always existed. I felt like I knew what I would teach my children. It like really brought me into a sense of being preoccupied with the inherent beauty of every soul. And at some point, more indirectly, it also brought me to an experience where I had this really strong epiphany level moment that if our love did not extend beyond our body's life, nothing in this moment even felt in any way like it existed. Like it all hinged on that for me. And so I came away from that with this unshakable sense. And so for me, it became the ground of my adult way of being in the world. And so it was like that initial easy sense of grace, but it was like now it was forged in fire and had so much more like depth underneath of it. And it began what was a more and well, I don't know. I mean, everything is a spiritual journey, like everything we do, but it began a more intentional spiritual journey for me, from there. So it was like that was the first kind of death and rebirth that became the foundation for everything in the rest of my life. And then it was more like opening into deaths through then, like the end of that marriage, like that death, and then surrendering so much in that space, which kind of took the tenor of my spiritual journey and brought in like a way more intuitive piece. I wouldn't have said before that happened, I had a really strong sense of being kind of in conversation with the divine. But then it became like this conversation. And then a few years after that, it became what felt like this full blown, wild, mystical experience that now like has meant so much. But after that first dissolution and reconstruction, which felt like a whole shift in consciousness,
mm,
it was like it was a consciousness level shift to me. Then like the deaths and rebirths have pretty much all been in relationship. So yeah, so there's my little note on death and rebirth. I feel you're wearing pink with your blonde hair. I am in white, but
mm.
really we are pretty into death and rebirth, Nicole.
Once again, if we like it or not. No, I appreciate that. There's a couple of things that really stand out to me that I'd love to just drop in on, and I think one is that there's so many words, so I have to like, give me a sec, but one is that that story, the beginning of that story, right? Like I was at this party and I, spoke to my partner in a certain way. And that's just not how I normally speak to people. I was a little patchy and people are telling me this, right? And it made me feel all of these things. Not even just you didn't even use the term, which I can really appreciate. Like I felt so bad about myself, right? I'm trying so hard in my own life to never use that language. But we say it all the time, right? I felt so bad. I feel so bad.
Mm.
You didn't use that language. Your language is always, poetic and beautiful, but instead, it's you brought us through the arc of like, where does that bring you, and like, what is the deepening that it brought you into, and what did you recognize, and even the, compulsive parts, the compulsive thoughts and obsessive thinking, the OCD that you brought in from the family, and um, deepening into that story and working through the healing work of recognizing your own grace and your own beauty, and coming through with the strength and the wherewithal as you move forward. And so it's like, what I love about that is that, and I think that's what I'm trying to say, is I feel like so many people, and I'd love, for this to change for people, and to be able to take these fragmented stories, right? Like these could be such a fragment in someone's life, like such a small thing, right? Oh yeah, there was this one night I wasn't really nice to Johnny,
It must be said there are plenty of nights where I haven't been very nice to people.
No, but what
Yeah,
I mean is, like, but it's
it's an
just
extra
each
some
story is, like, always held in these really small fragments,
yeah,
and then it's like, "Ah, I felt really horrible," and,
it
like,
could have remained a fragment.
it could have remained a fragment, and there was just so much deepening into it, and you're taking us through a little bit of the process. You can't share all of the depth of it, but you're taking us through the arc of the process as to how you recognized something in yourself that didn't feel aligned. And then you went on this
Mhm.
journey with it. And it wound up being a death journey. And then
Yeah.
something new emerged from it. Right.
It
So
was so beautiful, like, I would never change it for a second.
yeah.
It was so needed and, like, embedded in the whole.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And even from that, you even shared, which is a very common theme amongst our stories, and I imagine others too, is like when you emerge from that work, there's a deeper sense of intuition. There's a deeper sense of connection. There's something spiritual about it too. So I really, really appreciate that. And I think it's just a wonderful example of something that could be a fragment in someone's mind that turn into something much more as you're living this meaningful life.
Yeah.
And I've always felt this about you. When you said in the beginning, you said this deep sense of okayness, and that might not seem like a big deal in some ways. It is such a big deal. It's like you're probably like the most okay person I've ever met. and and the okayness is like, I mean, I've just seen you, whatever it is that you've been holding at the time, be able to like hold, but also be so deeply rooted and grounded and genuinely okay. And they've been situations that other people, even myself, like wouldn't be able to hold that without anxiety or fear or just feeling, the ground beneath me moving and shaking. And I hope I explained that well. And the psychological piece that really comes with that is like, you're an example of somebody who always felt safe in the world. And it's so rare. It's so rare that that's people's experiences. So it's like, I think on the surface, somebody could hear that and be like, wow, lucky you, you had this, beautiful childhood. Right. But really it, like, as you were saying and taking us through that arc, it's like, it's part of who you are. Like, it's part of like what you were meant to be and give in the world too. It's like, you're this deep sense of okayness in the
Mm,
world. And it's so, I mean, it's profound, really.
mm. Thank you. I feel like one thing that I felt called to, like, in the last, and again, it's like everything about who we are, I feel like it's so embedded in the whole in a way, and it's like the things that are our gifts and that are our beauty, it's like it's ours to
Mhm.
hold, like it is, and it's also completely dependent on being embedded in the whole, like what we've received,
Right.
and it's just, but I feel like I'm very comfortable in the dark, and like with the deep okayness, like I cry a lot, like we both cry a lot. But I mean, like, and I would say like my natural space of the so-called more negative emotions or places is definitely like I've had a lot of sadness and things, not in like a depressive way, but from things that meet me as loss or like pain, but like within those spaces of the dark and not seeing, I do feel a lot of trust. I feel like listening in the dark and then like trusting in the dark does allow such, I mean, it's more than that, but I feel if we can open into those places, then it helps us with that deep okayness wherever we are, you know. And I do feel called to help tell that story of being able to trust in the dark and move in the dark and, you know, listen in the dark. And that's, we haven't gotten to this very much, but I feel before I came to this, you were nearer this. And then I came to it like really intensely, you know, because we met the end of 2020. And then I like came into this really mystical experience the next year. But we're like listening. I remember being in calls with you, and you do often like you stop for a minute and you're like, I'm listening, like I'm attuning, you know? I feel like it doesn't look the same in me. But I came to, I would say after we first met, where my willingness to listen in the dark is pretty big. Like it's pretty, you know, I feel like I came to like, I will step off a cliff, you know, for what I hear. So I don't know. I think it's really powerful and profound. And I feel like coming into such a deep trusting of my own intuitive connection to self and divine and like listening completely, I feel it's brought me to a place where it feels like flying.
Yeah.
I also like, I do feel called as a writer to help tell the story of listening in the dark. And by listening, I always mean like listening to your intuition, listening to the divine and moving with that. And I know that's so strong in you too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it's just, it becomes just like a guiding force, right? It becomes, you know, you use the term, forget the term you just said, but you described it as, what did you describe?
Like how now it feels like flying where.
Yes. How it now feels like
Mm.
flying. And for me, and I was thinking about that. I had a little bit of a depth lens there because I was thinking about it. I was like, I wonder what that means to your okayness. But anyways, that could be
Mm.
for another time. But because for me, I was thinking about so for me, it feels like never being alone. And
Mm.
my experience as a child, but also I think as a soul who came into this world to experience is the depth of aloneness. And
Mm.
so I felt that kind of interesting to hear what it felt like to you to be deeply connected intuitively and what it feels
Mm.
like to me. I'm not drawing the lines for you, but if I were to draw,
Yeah,
just
I
say
would.
it meets that deeper need that was always
Mm.
there that I came with.
Hmm. That's interesting. I will add though, I feel like the flying piece has just come in. I feel
Okay.
like it's been like a deeper intuitive journey. Before it like felt, I feel like almost like immensity, you
Mhm.
know, where it's like it can, like that level of connection, just like being able to kind of feel into like the heartbeat of things. I don't know, like it's so strong. It's like such a large thing. It just feels like such immensity. But then I feel like when it came into being willing to like move without any safety net, just whoosh. And that it brings, I kind of want to say something else too. One thing I've always felt like the way I'm meant to be loved in the world is as a mom, just unequivocally. Like I know it's the largest archetype of my soul. Um, I felt probably as lover, and then I felt like, okay, and I'm meant to as writer also. Oh, I think I mentioned it just because I said like in writing, I feel called to tell the story. You can trust in the dark, you can listen in the dark. And so I've always felt like that was the piece that at some point I would like fully step into and embrace. And by writer, I mean like my own writing,
Yeah.
you know, my novel. And so I felt that, and I feel like I've come into understanding it a little bit differently later. I feel like that is a piece of it, but I feel like I've recently realized just through the things that have called to me, and then I've just started doing, like this being one of them. It
Mhm.
feels like it's almost more like singer of songs. Like I feel like some of it is it is writing, and some of it is just like these other things, like voice meeting world, offering this, offering that, and then a piece of it writing too. So I feel like that does feel like a big piece of how I'm meant to be loved in the world. And so I hold it with a little bit more expansiveness than I did before. And I feel like it's like that bridge has been crossed, like we are in it, you know. And so through like conversations with others, I feel like that also like where I feel called, what I feel called to do in my writing, I feel like it extends to these spaces too, you
Mm.
know. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know why I wanted to say that, but I did. So there you go.
That's okay. You wanted to say it. There's something I'm actually sitting with and wanting to say, so I'm gonna bring that in real quick. And
Do it.
it's interesting because you were talking about the deep okayness that also came through being able to sit in the dark, being able to sit in those difficult places, and something that's still unintegrated in me. And I'm still really curious about when the whole story comes to more fullness for me is I am 100% that person, right? Like if something's really sad, really painful, I'm really angry about it, whatever it is, like, and I wasn't always, right? I had to do
Mhm.
the work to get there, but I'm 100% that person on my own. But then I
Mm,
was like taken and put into situations where it's like, yeah, there's sadness, right? There's grief that comes along with being on this journey. There's all kinds of emotions personally, but really what my experience was like being dropped into just chaos. Like
mm,
just chaos, screaming, raging,
yeah.
like body stuff going everywhere, just really difficult moments. And something that when I say it's unintegrated for me and I kind of don't get it yet in ways, it's I don't know, energetically when I hold the two stories still, when I
Mhm.
speak these two stories, when I speak of the one that's deeply integrated as the self, it's like, got it, right?
Right.
But when you put me into this other one, it's like, where did that deep okayness go when I'm in that level of chaos? And I find myself curious to know, like, well, what if we took Robin and dropped her into that level of chaos? Like, what might
Mm,
or not happen? I find myself curious, and this is why it's all unintegrated, right? I find myself curious too about like maybe potentially my own neurodivergence, because I am the one in my home who will now wear headphones around because the sound
mhm,
is so activating for my body.
mm,
And I've learned those things about myself. No matter how much other work I've done, right? Like, okay, I know what's triggering in this moment. I know what I'm projecting in this moment. I know what's coming up. I can work on that. But it's like literally being in the chaos that I haven't been able to like land into deep okayness.
mhm.
Not always, at least, right? Sometimes it's there, but not always. And there's no answer to that for me. It's just me sharing what's coming
Yeah.
through.
Well, it's such a hard situation to have that
Mhm.
like in home space, you know, and I feel like this is just a tiny piece of it. Like it also reflects what is triggering on all these different levels, going back and forward. But just one thing that's just a simplistic thing to say, but it's also stuff with your kids is a whole different thing. Like I am like feel all the things. First, that has to have the qualifier. There's some nervous system stuff going on in
Mhm.
this. And I happen to have a pretty, I don't know if grounded nervous system is the right phrase, but if this is not the case, like you have to really respect that and you have to feel what you can feel, take yourself to the edge and then ground your system. Because if you just completely overwhelm yourself, it'll just be another trauma, you know? And so I kind of invite people to feel everything with the awareness that, like, you have to hold nervous system awareness with that, but still with the goal of feel all the things, right? But as mom, I do not want my son Gabe to just suffer a lot. I'm like, I surrender, I will suffer to whatever level I'm meant to suffer, like I will move through it, I can hold it. But the year that's been the hardest year of my life was a year where he had more suffering, and it was harder than all the other things. And profound movements of that year were having to hold together. I will walk through fire like 10,000 times over and over and over. Love as mother with a fearlessness. And, anyways, but I'm just saying, when it's your kids, I think there's all these different layers going on for you, but it's also just the awareness that your kids are in some kind of disharmony and pain. Like that just is going to be hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I can appreciate that, and also just really holding the arc of the places that we've gone today. It feels like it aligns in that way too, because it's like, and even when I was sharing with like writing the book, right? That's why I say like it's just not fully integrated, because it's like
Mm.
it's that experience of like, yeah, as the self, like feel all
Mhm.
things, be in all the places, go through the dark, hang out in the underworld, like Hades, here I am. But
Yeah.
but if my role as mother, like forget it. Like, no, no, like we want them to be okay. And
Right.
there's a lot of suffering involved in them not being okay. So
Mhm.
um yeah, I find it interesting, and even as we talk about it, I feel like there's something that I still haven't integrated
Mm.
and completed. I'm not holding my breath that I'm gonna have the answer anytime soon,
Well,
so
I feel like we're always going to be in something that's like not integrated yet. I know this is a big one, but
this
like
is a big one, but
there's
yeah,
always bound to be something that like we haven't integrated yet because we can only integrate so fast.
right. Yeah.
But mhm. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Hmm. When I close my eyes, what I see is, and I was feeling this before too, and so I trust that as guidance. I actually see us talking about real life stories, experiences where we have learned to trust intuition.
Mm.
And not today necessarily. I think we've run our arc that feels complete. But I think there's space to share more of that. It's like, well, hey, like I've done so much work, and I've had so many beautiful experiences, I'd rather say, where I've learned to like fully trust, as you're saying.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, how do you get there? How do you get there? And how do you start to
Mm.
trust that inner voice? And that inner voice, I think, is very much part of the sacred story, right? Because
Yeah.
it is the unfolding. It's taking these fragmented stories that we think belong in just fragments somewhere. It's deepening into them, whichever ones are most calling to us. If you don't know what's calling to you, just pay attention to whatever you're thinking about or dreaming about or thinking about while you're hearing us talk in this conversation, right? So whatever it is that's calling to us, deepening into those stories, threading through the depth and the meaningfulness. And then what seems to come after that is an opening into more of the self, knowing the self, being able to trust the self. And
Mm.
that when you can trust the self, you can start to trust your intuition more. So I do think there's a little bit of a nucleus or an arc there of what we were
Mm.
sharing today in different ways.
Mm. I don't know what led me into my trust.
Hmm.
I don't know if I do. I feel like for me, when I had my first time of like being called to surrender, because my inner journeys of like that story I shared of the dissolution and reconstruction, it didn't really involve surrender. It's like entirely within myself. I wasn't having to surrender to any external circumstances.
Yeah.
And then I just like go on this journey since, from there. And then I think I don't know if this is necessary to have in our conversation. I'm just thinking out loud, but um, I guess it was like from there, I really became aware of inherent beauty within everything. And so I think it was very much like being attuned to the gifts of suffering in a way, the gifts of things. And then I had other things that happened that were again painful, but brought really important gifts. And so then it's like the first time I was called to surrender, to have to meet external circumstances I didn't want, was when my then husband wanted to get a divorce. And in that was a journey of surrender, like such surrender. And I had never really had to surrender like that before. But I feel like the 9 years before, a pretty deep journey brought me to a place where I was ready to just do it. And in that depth of surrender, that's what I feel allowed that more like communication, conversation with the divine. You know, it was just like, I think such utter just like opening to whatever my place in the whole was and accepting that. And then once surrender came in, that was what began the intuitive journey.
Well, and I think that's what I'm saying is it's like whether it's surrender or it's just getting to a place psychologically in your own work. It's when it's in that space, you know, whether it's surrender where you're deepening in or it's the like you're coming back out. It's just the term that I've always used in therapy, and it's not mine. I'm not going to say that it's only mine, but is victim, survivor, thriver. And I think so much therapy and healing work, not to say all, but I think a lot of it does move people into a place where they're surviving. And for me, I think that thriving place is where we start to live with depth, with meaning, with wholeness. And in that space, you do open up intuitively. There's a lot of ways. There's a lot of ways to get there, but yeah, I just thought it might be something for another conversation where maybe even not so much how you got there, but just what those intuitive moments look like.
Yeah. No, I love that thought because I have felt, I think before I've just thought, okay, well, I can share a story of what it looks like trusting in the dark, moving in the dark, right? And that's how I felt the sense of writing and maybe beyond writing, you know, what we're doing in conversation. But if someone asked me, how do I start to trust in that? I think that's probably something a lot of people would feel. I don't know how I would answer it for them aside from just sharing a story of it, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well, first off, I trust that sharing stories opens things up for people. So I think that there's meaning in that. But there's also I've experienced some very fun ways to kind of play with it too. Like exercises you can do or
I
what.
think that would be fun to touch on with people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before we're done, I'm just pulling a card for us. We got happy, happy.
Aw.
Which I think is a really nice companion to being queens of the underworld. Like, really, I do. I think it's a really nice holding of all the things together. So,
Well,
all
and
right.
I feel very happy to be in this space with you today. It's been a while since we've gotten to connect
Yeah.
in this way. And so I just feel so much joy and gratitude for that anyway. So I do feel
Yeah.
happy. And I like that it says happy, happy because there's two of us. So
Oh, I like that. Happy Valentine's Day. It's been nice spending the morning with you.
it's really staying with you too.
Okay. Until
Yeah.
next time.
Okay.
But oh my gosh, the other one that just flew out was co-create.
Perfect.
Thank you for being with us today. If you feel called, follow the podcast wherever you listen and connect with us on Instagram or YouTube at sacred.conversations.podcast. And most of all, may you keep opening to yourself, to the mystery, and to the story within you that's still being written.